Hello, it's me, Mike, with HPDS. This video will be a reading and a study of Leviticus chapter 15. Leviticus chapter 15. And before I get started, of course, I will pray by reciting the Lord's Prayer as written in Matthew chapter 6. And the Lord's Prayer reads, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So Leviticus, if you remember this chapter, the first several chapters of Leviticus 1 through 7 have been about the laws for the sacrifices and for the offerings. And then chapters 8, 9, and 10 were about the consecration of Aaron and his sons. These were the priests over the tabernacle. And then, of course, the last few chapters, 11 through even this chapter, 11 through 15, are chapters about cleanliness. Remember, the past two chapters, 13 and 14 in particular, were about leprosy and lepers and how to clean them and how to check for them and so forth. And so moving in now, we are moving into Leviticus chapter 15, which is still about cleanliness. Let's take a look at what we're looking at today. Leviticus 15, this chapter is about discharges and uncleanness. Uncleanness. So what we're looking for is just verses 1 through 30 are going to be about personal uncleanness, and then verses 31 through 33 we're going to read about a separation from uncleanness. So that is what we're going to be looking for in chapter 15 of Leviticus. And as usual, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll read the whole chapter, and I'll just read it. I'll read it straight through, and then afterwards I'll come back and reread it line by line, with the help of the Holy Spirit, just kind of explaining in more in detail what exactly is going on, so we can kind of really figure out what's going on in the Bible. So I'll go ahead and get started right now. And Leviticus chapter 15, it reads, And the Lord spake unto Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When any man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean. And this shall be his uncleanness in his issue, whether his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped from his issue. It is his uncleanness. Every bed whereon he lieth that hath the issue is unclean, and everything whereon he sitteth shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth his bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And he that sitteth on anything whereon he sat that hath the issue shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And he that toucheth the flesh of him that hath the issue shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And if he that hath the issue spit upon him that is clean, then he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And what saddle soever he rideth upon that hath the issue shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth anything that was under him shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth any of those things shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And whomsoever he toucheth that hath the issue, and hath not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And the vessel of earth that he toucheth which hath the issue shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. And when he that hath an issue is cleansed of his issue, then he shall number to himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes, and bathe his flesh in running water, and shall be clean. And on the 8th day he shall take to him 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, and come before the Lord unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and give them unto the priest. And the priest shall offer them the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him before the Lord for his issue. And if any man's seed of copulation go out from him, then he shall wash his flesh in water, and be unclean until the even. And every garment and every skin whereon is the seed of copulation shall be washed with water, and be unclean until the even. The woman also with whom man shall lie with seed of copulation, they shall both bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the even. And if a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days, and whosoever toucheth her shall be unclean until the even. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth her bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And whosoever toucheth anything that she sat upon shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. And if it be on her bed, or on anything whereon she sitteth, when he toucheth it, he shall be unclean until the even. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days. And all the bed wherein he lieth shall be unclean. And if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation, or if it run beyond the time of her separation, all the days of the issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. Every bed whereon she lieth all the days of her issue shall be unto her as the bed of her separation, and whatsoever she sitteth upon shall be unclean as the uncleanness of her separation. And whosoever toucheth those things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. But if she be cleansed of her issue, then she shall number to herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take unto her 2 turtles or 2 young pigeons, and bring them unto the priest to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the priest shall offer for the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for her before the Lord for the issue of her uncleanness. Thus shall ye separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, that they die not in their uncleanness when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law of him that hath an issue, and of him whose seed goeth from him, and is defiled therewith, and of her that is sick of her flowers, and of him that hath an issue, of the man and of the woman, and of him that lieth with her that is unclean. Okay, so that was Leviticus chapter 15 in its entirety. And so yeah, it's mostly about it's about personal uncleanness and a separation from this uncleanness. So that's what this is kind of explaining, how and it does make a distinction in this particular chapter that I will cover, how this is regarding the children of Israel. So of course, I have mentioned, like for us, in modern day, all this kind of makes you unclean. I've said that. But in reality, this was meant for the children of Israel. Of course, when we read further into the New Testament, we find out that Jesus Christ died for our sins. And so therefore, he's paid for all of our sin. And he's made us clean. And that's the other thing to keep in mind, or that that these people were made unclean, and this is kind of, I would say, how would I say it? Like naturally, this kind of makes you unclean. And even we would know in today's modern world, these things are kind of, these things are issues, obviously. So, but I'll go ahead and I'll read through this one more time. I'll read line by line. And I just pray that the Holy Spirit, takes over and explains it in better detail than just reading it straight through. Okay, so let me go ahead and pull this up one more time, and we'll get started on this. Excuse me. Leviticus chapter 15. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, so this is God talking to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When any man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue, he is unclean. So remember verses 1 through 30, personal uncleanness. God is saying right here, if you've got any running issue out of his flesh, so if you've got a cut and you're bleeding, if you've got some sort of scab that has some sort of pus coming out, or if you're bleeding from your nose or bleeding from your mouth or from, I would imagine this even has, if you've got a running nose, obviously if you've got a running issue out of his flesh, if you're sick, if you're diarrhea would probably be considered, you got a running, maybe you're, all manner of things, anything that's coming out, even if you're sick, this makes you unclean. Because of this issue, you are unclean. So you could be sick, and that makes you unclean. Keep that in mind. God is showing us that anything, if you've got an issue or something's coming out of your flesh, whether it be blood or mucus or and we'll see other things here, then you are unclean. And this shall be his uncleanness in his issue. Whether his flesh run with his issue or his flesh be stopped from his issue, it is his uncleanness. So keep that in mind. If you've got, this is your uncleanness, it shall be that you are unclean. Even if it's just, people might consider this unfair. People constantly, in modern day, people ask the question, how could God let this happen? Well, this would kind of fall into that realm, in my opinion, because, you're sick and that makes you unclean. So it seems, it can seem kind of harsh. Well, how can you call him unclean because he's sick? It's not his fault he's sick. Well, God is saying, yeah, it's your uncleanness. That this is your sick. It's your unclean. It's your uncleanness. It's God is saying it's your uncleanness. That this is why, this is how it is. And then going forward, every bed. So now you can see how this uncleanness gets spread. So keep that in mind. Say you're, sick, and you're just, you got a runny nose. You got you're sick. Every bed that you lie on is unclean. So you're sick in bed. You got the flu. You got the cold. You got a fever. You're got a stomach virus, something like that. Something's coming out. Every bed whereon he lieth that has an issue is unclean, and everything whereon he sitteth shall be unclean. So it's all, and this is very, I'll mention COVID in today's modern world. COVID is the thing. It's November 2020 right now as I make this video, and COVID is, making everybody realize, or making, take into consideration the fact that you could get someone else sick. And so this is that same concept. You can get other people, make them unclean. And you're sick, you've got a running issue. The bed you lie on is unclean, and wherever you sit on it is, and anything that so you go to your, you go somewhere, you sit on a chair, that chair is unclean. You just, and then whosoever toucheth his bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. So now if somebody touches something that you were, you're sick in bed, somebody comes and touches your bed, well, now they themselves have to bathe in water and they're unclean until the evening. So you've just made someone else unclean. Which of course we know, like I said, COVID-19 is going around. You can make someone else sick. So we're all staying 6 feet away and covering our faces with masks for this very reason. And he that sitteth on anything whereon he sat that hath the issue shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. So not just beds, but chairs. You go sit on a chair, somebody sits on it, they're unclean too. They got to wash themselves. Now, remember, this is something that they have to do regardless. I mean, we found out back in the trespass offering chapter, which I believe was chapter 4 of Leviticus, something like chapter 4, maybe chapter 5. I can't remember off the top of my head, but back when they were, or maybe it was, let me see, committing sins unknowingly, chapters 5, Leviticus 5, verses 17 through 19, committing sins unknowingly. So remember, even though you committed a sin unknowingly, once you found out about it, you still had to go ahead and make that trespass offering. And remember, keep that in mind again. If you became unclean, that was in chapter 5, you had to make the trespass offering. So you get sick, you got to make a trespass offering because you're unclean. So keep that in mind. Now all of a sudden, look how many sacrifices, and look at your own daily life and start thinking about what it would look like in modern world if these are still the laws, these are the rules and regulation. All of a sudden, not just if you were sick, say you're taking care of somebody that's sick, and then all of a sudden you become unclean yourself. You got to go make the trespass offering. How interesting is that? These were the laws for these people that they had to live by some almost 4,000 years ago. And he that toucheth the flesh of him that hath the issue shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. So even if you touch that person, so if you touch anything they sit on, any bed they lay on, if you touch their skin, you shake their hand, you're unclean too. Which once again should fit right in line with the idea of what we're doing for COVID. We are separating 6 feet. We're putting on gloves. We're putting on masks. We're staying indoors. We're staying away from other people. That's just what's going on here. If you were unclean, this is exactly what you had to do. If you're unclean, you stay away from other people, or else, guess what? You've just made them have to go sacrifice, make that trespass offering just because you touched them. So if you were sick and you were unclean, you wouldn't just be going outdoors, just sitting on every park bench, sitting on every restaurant table, none of that. They wouldn't be going out into other people's homes, because then they'd be doing the other person a disservice, because that other person suddenly was indebted, had to go make a trespass offering, or else they were unclean. And if you stayed unclean, chances are you might get leprosy. That's what they were just being told. If you're unclean, eventually you just might have leprosy. And so and God himself, remember just the last chapter, said that God himself put the curse of leprosy. He would put the curse of leprosy in a house. If I put the curse of leprosy in your house, he said. So these people, if they're not careful, they stay unclean, they could potentially get leprosy. Wouldn't that, just like in modern society, it's the same idea. If you keep getting sick, or if you stay sick, you might get really unsick and catch the COVID, and potentially die. So you didn't want to, just like in modern day, just like then, if you were sick, you were unclean, you stayed away from other people. Or else they themselves would be made unclean and made to do things that they, if it wasn't for you, they'd never have to do that. And if he that hath the issue spit upon him that is clean, then he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. So it's just the same thing if you spit on him. That's why we wear the masks. So if you're sick and you go and you spit on someone that is not sick, it's like you made them sick. It's the same thing. You're clean and unclean. And that person now is unclean until the evening, which is what the even means. And what saddle soever he rideth upon that hath the issue shall be unclean. So same thing. This would be like being in a car today. If you go into your car and you're sick and you drive in your car, that saddle is unclean. And whosoever toucheth anything that was under him shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth any of those things shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. So now if say you're sick, or you're you get in a car, you drive around, somebody else gets in that car and drives around after you in the driver's seat or whatever, they're all unclean. You've made them unclean, and so you've done them a disservice. Stay indoors. That's what COVID's all about, apparently. Stay indoors, put masks on, put gloves on. The idea of, think about gloves. Does it count? Does gloves count? But this is all just things, this was meant for the children of Israel. And we'll see that here coming at the bottom of the chapter. I'll show you what I'm talking about. And whomsoever he toucheth that hath the issue, and hath not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until evening. So now you gotta, yeah, see, if you're touching them, you just so much touch them, you gotta do all this stuff. You gotta wash your clothes, you gotta take a bath, and you're unclean the whole day. You can't, and you yourself are unclean, and now you can't touch somebody else, or you'll make them unclear. You could spread it. One person could be unclean, and they make hundreds. Everybody in the world could be made unclean if that person just touched them, just kept touching everybody, and they can touch other. And that's, again, we see this just very much in the COVID. Apparently they tell us that it started off at some sort of market in China, right? And that it somehow has now touched all these people who have died of the virus, COVID virus. So apparently somehow down the line, all these people have come into contact by touching or spitting on each other or touching things that the other people have touched. So according to this, you could become unclean by touching an object that somebody that unclean was already unclean that they touched, and you didn't even know about it. And that could happen. You wouldn't even know that you are unclean. Yet there you are, unclean. And the vessel of earth that he toucheth which hath the issue shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. So now look what else you have to do. So if you touch a vessel of earth, so you touch a clay pot, you touch a clay plate, a glass, or a cup or a bowl or something. If it's made out of earth, made out of clay, it shall be broken. And if it's made out of vessel, if every vessel of wood, so now you got a wood, a wood container of some sort, a wood box, a wood bowl, a wood, if you touch it, then you have to clean it in water. So you have to do your dishes if you touch any of your dishes. And when he that hath an issue is cleansed of his issue, then he shall number to himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes, and bathe his flesh in running water, and shall be clean. So now you're finally clean. Say you get over your sickness or anything that's coming out. And this is not just sickness, but think of, say, for example, you had an amputation. Let's get into something else. Say they cut off a body part. Yeah, you've got all this blood coming. Maybe they survive, and if they survive it, well, suddenly, while this is healing from themselves, they're unclean the entire time. They're unclean. Then now, it's healed up and it's, the skin is over it, or, however the cases be, you're no longer bleeding, you're no longer sick. Then you go ahead and you can cleanse. So this is, like I said, many, many things, not anything that's coming out of the skin, anything that's coming out of the flesh. Very interesting. But even when you are finally clean, once you're finally healed up, your scabs have, healed over. You're no longer bleeding from a cut, from an amputation, anything like that. You number 7 days. You appropriate yourself 7 days for cleansing. So that means for a whole week you kind of cleanse, and you also wash your clothes and bathe your flesh in running water. And then after that, you're clean. Same thing, if you get sick, you got to spend a whole week cleansing and make sure you wash all your clothes and wash your skin and so forth. And on the 8th day, he shall take to him 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and come before the Lord unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and give them unto the priest. Very similar to what we just saw in the last one too. For the lepers. And the priest shall offer them, the one for a sin offering, the other for a burnt offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for him before the Lord for his issue. And if any man's seed of copulation, so now we're kind of moving on to, that was anything skin from your skin, sickness, kind of any kind of blood, any kind of pus, any kind of something like that. Now we're moving on to, let's get into a little bit more personal, a little bit more, this is obviously sexual. If any man's seed of copulation. So we know that as, I'll just say the word, an ejaculation. A man ejaculates their sperm, something like that. If any man's seed of copulation. So if you masturbate, if you have sex, then you are unclean. Then he shall wash his flesh in water and be unclean until the evening. So that's also interesting. If you have sex as a man and you masturbate, you're unclean. You have to wash yourself. Can't touch anybody else, and then not only that, then all of a sudden you have to make the trespass offering. Again, keep that in mind. You got to make the trespass offering for having sex. And every garment and every skin whereon is the seed of copulation shall be washed with water and be unclean until the even. So all your clothes that so if wherever the seed of copulation. So for some reason I'm being reminded, and this is very silly, but Bill Clinton and the dress that I forget her name already. I already forget the intern's name that ultimately led to Bill Clinton's I forget what it's called while he was the president. It was his can't think of the word right now. I think it starts with an I. Something happened to him. They put him in front of the court while he was president, and he had an affair with Monica Lewinsky. There you go, Monica Lewinsky. And for some reason that just, there was a whole thing where she kept the dress that he had he had ejaculated onto while they were in one of their encounters, and she kept the dress for so long, and it kind of came up. It was a big thing back in the 1990s, all over the news. They wouldn't stop talking about her purple dress with Mr. Clinton's seed of copulation on it. Well, they were all, they were touching an unclean garment. Shall be washed with water. Apparently they never washed it. She kept it as proof for whatever reason. And, they just made everybody unclean. Anybody who touched it, anybody who handled it became unclean. And the woman also with whom man shall lie with seed of copulation, they shall both bathe themselves in water and be clean until the evening. So if you had sex with your wife, guess what? Y'all were both unclean. Anytime you and your wife had sex, you had to make the trespass offering. Remember what the trespass offering is? That's a whole animal that you had to, it was a whole animal that you had to sacrifice. That would be like equivalent to money in our day and age. And now moving on from the man, his seed of copulation, now we move into a woman. If a woman have an issue and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days, and whosoever toucheth her, so she's on what we call her menstrual cycle. She's on, her period. People would call it that. So she's got blood. Guess what? She's going to be put apart 7 days. So when she's on her menstrual cycle, put her away for a week, and whosoever toucheth her shall be unclean. So if you come and you touch her while she's on her menstrual cycle, you're unclean. She's unclean. You're unclean. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Same thing with the bed, chair. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whosoever toucheth her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. So if you touch her clothes, so once again, if somebody's a woman, if she's having her menstrual cycle, and if she's just out and about running around, sitting on chairs and laying in beds that other people might come in contact with, she's doing them all a disservice because they're all becoming unclean just for touching items. And just more proof. And whosoever toucheth anything that she sat upon shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean. So if you get unclean, you're unclean until the evening, and you got to wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water. And remember, you also have to make the trespass offering. That's what it said in Leviticus chapter 5. If you touched anything unclean, you had to make this sacrifice. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, she shall be unclean 7 days. He shall be unclean 7 days. And all the bed whereon he lieth shall be unclean. So this is also kind of, this is something, I would... So if someone's on her menstrual cycle, a woman's on her menstrual cycle, and any man lie with her, so they have sex together, all of a sudden he's unclean for 7 days. And also the bed is also unclean. So if they have sex while she's on her menstrual cycle, he's also unclean for 7 days, just like she is set apart for at least 7 days. But here you go, 7 days outside. If a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation, or if it run beyond the time of her separation, so it goes beyond the 7 days, or it's not during her normal cycle. All the days of the unissue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. So if you have a longer than average menstrual cycle, you're going to be unclean the whole time. It's like you're just, the whole time. And every bed whereon she lieth all the days of her issue shall be unto her as the bed of her separation, and whatsoever she sitteth upon shall be unclean as the uncleanness of her separation. And so that's kind of, a woman on her menstrual cycle. So same thing, if a man's running around masturbating, having sex, he's making all kinds of things unclean. Same thing with the woman. If she's running around with her period, she's making things unclean. And also people, if you're running around sick, you're making everybody unclean around you. And moving on, here's a little bit. And whosoever toucheth those things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. So that's all based off that. Moving on. But if she be cleansed of her issue, then she shall number to herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. So same thing. So once she's cleansed of her issue, then you kind of have another 7 days, and then you're clean again. That was very similar to what we read up here earlier. Once you were clean of your sickness, for example, you held yourself, for another 7 days. So, let's see. So, and on the 8th day she shall take unto her two turtles, which are two turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons, and bring them unto the priest to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the priest shall offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering, and the priest shall make an atonement for her before the Lord of the issue of her uncleanness. So very similar to the sickness and so forth. Thus shall ye separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, that they die not in their uncleanness, when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. So God is saying that this is for the children of Israel. You're going to separate the children of Israel. So this isn't talking about us. We're not children of Israel in today's world. They were children of Israel back then. We are the Gentiles. But he's saying that they're supposed to separate the children from their uncleanness, so that they don't die in uncleanness. Because when they defile my tabernacle that is among them, because they are defiling the tabernacle by coming to God unclean. And remember, you can be unclean from all manner of things. And then on top of that, once you did become clean, you still had to come make the trespass offering. And so you were coming constant. And then think about all the liars. I mean, we know in today's modern world, think about today's modern world. This would be kind of similar to Catholics doing their confessionals. They go out through the week, they get all unclean, they come, they make their confession to their priest. They're acting like these children of Israel, that Jesus wasn't enough, that they got to come over here and do this to make them clean. But that even those kinds of people that are coming to confessional every week, they may not be telling the truth all the time. Even though they are coming, they might be forgetting some of their sins. So when they're coming, they're unclean. Just like these people were going to God unclean because of obviously their own mortality, their own inability to keep track of all this. I mean, think about that. I mean, any manner of sicknesses, any manner of, masturbation, any number of these things people did perhaps on the daily that were never reported. So when they did finally come to God, they were still unclean. So God is saying, and remember, if you go back to chapter 10, this is all kind of hinting at chapter 10, Leviticus 10, what happened to Adab and Abihu, remember? Nadab and Abihu were killed because they were priests that came and did something that they were not told to do. They were told they did something wrong, so they didn't do something they didn't follow directions, and they were killed by fire. And their family, his father, they were not allowed to mourn. It was pretty severe. And so God is saying that, look, if you come to his tabernacle unclean, you could die, just as those two priests died. So there's a lot, it's getting kind of strict all of a sudden when you realize how often these things are done, and how many people, these are natural things that every woman has her menstrual cycle. So no matter what, a woman was going to become unclean and have to make trespass offerings every month. And a man too, he's got a man could be making trespass offerings every day if he's masturbating or having sex with, it starts becoming all of a sudden, these are things that in today's modern world are not really thought of or considered practical or even possible, maybe, because that seems very difficult to, every time you masturbate, you have to be unclean the rest of your day. You have to wash your clothes, and anybody you touch while you're unclean, or anybody that touches some things of yours, they get unclean too. So you got to make sure you let everybody know, hey, I just masturbated and I'm unclean, so don't touch that chair that I was just sitting on, because it's unclean too. So keep that in mind. If everybody had to do that in today's world, everybody, every woman that's on her menstrual cycle, on her period, anytime she goes, and she'd have to be telling everybody, don't sit on that. You sit on it? Sorry, man, you're unclean. I'm sorry to tell you, I'm unclean, you're unclean. You got to go do this sacrifice. You got to clean yourself. Go make sure you go take a shower. And while you're at it, don't touch anybody else, because you'll make them unclean. And you better make sure you let them know, because it's just a vicious cycle if nobody's telling each other these things. So that's what God's saying. It's for the children of Israel, though. Keep that in mind. This is for the children of Israel. This is part of their covenant. This is part of God leading these people as chosen people while he's in their presence. And he's letting it be known what it is and how it is. This is the law of him that hath an issue, of him whose seed goeth from him and is defiled therewith, and of her that is sick of her flowers, and of him that hath an issue, of the man, and of the woman, and of him that lieth with her that is unclean. So that's what this is just telling you about that. This is the law of that. So, but that was Leviticus chapter 15, and that kind of ends these chapters of cleanliness, of cleanness. We're going to move into kind of the last section of this chapter, sort of until the end of the book, which are just more like customs and regulations that they also have in their daily lives, all over their in other parts of their lives. But this really focused on cleanness, and keep that in mind. Like that was it seems like it's not too difficult, but then when you start realizing, especially in corrupt worlds, because in today's world, masturbation is thought of as natural. It's thought of as something everybody should do. Sex is the same thing. Sex should be enjoyed with somebody who you care about. Never understanding the consequences of what God is saying, that when these things happen, you are unclean. You could die if you came across the Lord. If he came to you and you were unclean in any of these things that are so easy, it happens to everybody every other day. All these things happen to us all the time. Countless times in your life will these issues come up that make you sick or make you unclean, and you don't even have to be unclean yourself. You just have to touch something unclean that somebody else has touched, and you are unclean. So it's very difficult to keep track of in a human mind, and especially in today's modern world where we're just so much more lax, where we don't consider this. We don't consider God, in fact. So it's really sad that most people don't consider God, realizing that if you are unclean, you will die in his presence. And so that's why he had to die to clean us. And so that's why it's a huge sacrifice, and it was a huge gift that Jesus Christ has bestowed to us, and all we have to do is believe it and know that it happened. And like I said, a lot of people in today's modern world would find it difficult to believe that this would be associated with God, the Lord, that you would get clean and look at all the bad things, how easy it was to become unclean, how much it interrupted your lives. You had to be separated for a whole week. Think about that. You got a job, you're a woman. In today's modern world, you get your period, you have to stay away for 7 whole days. You can't, like that'd just be impossible. Or a man too, say you're at work and you become unclean in one way or another. You get sick, you got to miss all this time off of work from your job or from your life, all kinds of things. You're contained for a whole week. So it was just the idea of, and it happens so much. It's so often. How often would you be getting sick if these, not sick, but unclean. But think about that. And think about if doctors had to follow this. What if a doctor, somebody is unclean, they're sick and they go to the hospital, they got a running issue from their flesh, and a doctor comes and touches them. Well, guess what? Now that doctor is sick. Now that doctor can't really heal anybody else, really. They're kind of sick. All these, it's just the ramifications of it all. Think about if you think it through, people become unclean very, very easily. And keeping track of it may not be entirely humanly possible, or at least very difficult for humans to keep track of it, especially if they were just living a life like in today's modern America, where nobody cares about the Lord. Nobody's thinking about the Lord. There's countless religions to choose from if you want to believe in a religion at all. And so many other philosophies to subscribe to. There's so many things that they're just not thinking about a God. They're not thinking about being unclean in front of him and how it could kill them if this happens. And of course, this is the one true God, so of course he's real, even though people don't want to always believe that. And of course, it's still the same thing. If you come into contact with him unclean, you will die. And so it's just that simple to realize and to understand that all you got to do is believe that these things made us unclean, that Jesus Christ made his sacrifice to make us clean. We're clean. We're not subject to these works that the children of Israel did, because they were subject to these, and theirs was more. They were set aside. They were chosen. They were. God was in their presence. Keep that in mind. God was in their presence, and they just could not keep up with it. Obviously, they couldn't keep up with it. So, but I will go ahead and end this video here. That was Leviticus chapter 15. And of course, I will do as I normally do. And I will ask that if you like what I'm doing, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future chapter by chapter Bible study. And I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.